screening from public right of way and from other from adjacent properties as well. What the applicant has proposed is to expand the districts where the use is allowed by adding it to the industrial mixed use district, or IX, retaining the special use permit requirements and removing the 1 mile spacing requirement as well from adjacent properties as well. I have here just a few visuals and maps that will hopefully provide some context to the existing rules and the proposed request. The first one here shows the heavy industrial zoning areas throughout the city. Heavy industrial is what's known as a special district in the UDO. It is one of the least prevalent districts in the city in terms of land area. What you see there is about 209 parcels, about 3,278 acres, which equates to about 2.8% of the city's total land area. Next slide here will show the existing tow yards that have been permitted to date. You can see there's about a dozen of them. The pinkish dots represent the tow yards. The blue circles around that represent the 1 mile buffer in which no other tow yard can locate today due to the existing requirement. Next slide here existing tow yards. This slide shows the additional land area that could be used for towing yards should this text change be authorized or adopted. It shows the industrial mixed use district, which in contrast to the heavy industrial district, IX is the most prevalent non-residential district we have in the city. About 2,200 parcels, which equates to just under 10,000 acres and about 8.5% of city's total land area. So finally, this map here just shows a combination. So the peach and purple areas added together, and the tow yards absent the 1 mile buffer shows the areas in the city where tow yards can be allowed should the exchange. So you've got a couple of options. Obviously, you can recommend to leave the requirements as they are and use tow yards only in the IH district and retain the buffer requirements, or you can authorize or recommend authorization of the text change. If you do so, staff does recommend a limited use standard to kind of offset the increase in land area where these uses could be allowed, such that there would be a minimum 150-foot distance from any tow yard to any residential use, essentially any parcel containing a dwelling. If you do so, staff does recommend and that's all I have. I can take this down and pass it off to Brandon, and I can answer any questions at any point. Would also note that I believe the applicant is on the line as well.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. We'll go to Brandon next. You're muted.
Apologize. Councilmember Branch, did you want to take public comment on the text change item first? I'm sorry, you're muted. I'm sorry, you're muted.
I said no. I wanted you to present, then we'll go next.
Okay, sure. As council knows, at the May 4th City Council meeting during public comment, several residents of a community in the city spoke about concerns that they had about towing within their community. At that meeting, it was requested that our office look at where enhancements could be made to the city's existing towing ordinance to provide additional protections to owners of vehicles that were being towed from private lots within the city. We provided a memorandum and some suggested changes to the city's towing ordinance to the council a few months ago, one of which is based on changes in state law that have occurred in the past 10 years, and then others were in response to council's request on the 4th. The primary change related to changes in state law reflect a 2014 Supreme Court case in North Carolina, where an ordinance in Chapel Hill setting charges to recover vehicles towed from private lots was thrown out as being in excess of what the general statutory ordinance making authority was held by the town to be. And so we're recommending that the provisions in the city code relating to setting maximum charges to retrieve vehicles be removed as they're inconsistent with that Supreme Court decision. In substitution for that language, we do believe that we can add language requiring that a towing operator that has towed a vehicle and is storing the vehicle can be required to accept payment by cash, debit card, or a major credit card, and to provide a receipt. So there's clear evidence of whether or not the fees have been paid, as well as provide maximum opportunities to use different forms of payment for those fees. In addition to that change, we had 5 other recommendations, one of which touched on the request for the text change. And so we wanted to bring this to committee so that it can be considered together as it goes back to the full council. Currently within the city code, there's a requirement that any vehicle that is towed from a lot within the city must be towed to a storage lot also located within the city limits. We're recommending to allow for closer proximity from a location where a vehicle was towed from to where it's being stored, that be reduced to a 10-mile radius. We did lift the requirement that that be located within the city limits, but the council can certainly consider that further, and that the location where the vehicle is stored be located on a public transit line. So that is what ties back to the presentation that Justin gave. We want to ensure that they have the ability to have tow yards located within that 10-mile radius in the city. And planning has looked at that and determined that that 10-mile radius does cover the entire city limits currently, if you look at the eligible sites under the current zoning requirements, or under what's been proposed in the text change. So I'm happy to proceed with the other recommended changes at this point, or we can stop and discuss it as it relates to Justin's item, whatever your preference.
Okay, thank you. And as other council members are digesting this and reading that, I want to go ahead and open it up for any public comments. And then I want to open up to council members. So I believe we have a Mr. Johnson who signed up.
Yes, this is
Alan.
Tom Johnson. I was the one who proposed the amendment
Okay, so
regarding tow yards.
yeah, so we're gonna have 3 minutes for all our public speaking per person. So if you could state your name and your address, and we'll open it up at this time on these 2 subjects.
Okay. I'm not speaking on the predatory towing because that, I mean, except for the overlap maybe in terms of that radius versus in the city limits, that could impact what I'm going to present. But I'm Tom Johnson. I'm an attorney with Williams Mullen, and I represent Raleigh Towing, who's one of the towing companies that's in the city. Raleigh Towing for a while has been looking for another location, and the restricting point that Raleigh Towing has is Raleigh Towing is on the city towing list, and in order to be on that list, you have to be within the city limits. So when Raleigh Towing went out and looked for a site within the city limits, being limited to heavy industrial, there's as was presented by Justin, there's very few areas of the city that are zoned heavy industrial, and then it even goes further down to a smaller amount in terms of being able to identify a property owner that may be ready, willing, and able to sell a site within that district. And so for a long period of time, Raleigh Towing's been trying to find a location and has not been able to be able to do that. So what I presented coming forward is a proposal that it be allowed as a special use, so it would continue as a special use with the restrictions within the IX district to open up more areas for tow yards to exist. And, you know, in addition to that, proposed eliminating the 1 mile spacing requirement, because that's a further limiting factor on locations where tow yards can be located. There are restrictions within the special use permit or requirements under the current ordinance that provide some protection for adjoining property owners. And we have no objection to the setback requirement from residential properties. It wasn't our desire at all to be close to residential properties. We just needed to have more locations such as some existing warehousing districts that are zoned IX that are in the city that would be an appropriate location for a tow yard. but they are unavailable because they're not zoned heavy industrial. And that's just but an example. My client had a property actually under contract within IX, and we could not close on it because of the zoning restriction. So we just need that opened up. You know, the good thing about it is with my client's desire to be on the towing list for the city of Raleigh, that comes with, and that being part of, or is subject to the regulations that the police department has, and therefore provides actually some protection. I mean, he's willing to be regulated because he wants to be on that list, and being on that list has some responsibilities associated with it that really help in terms of any concerns, say, about predatory towing or anything like that. And my client would also like a better location than where he is now, which is not very accessible and not very good, to be able to go to a new location with a new building that's in a better location, to be able to, you know, when someone has a car towed, that they be able to get to the car in a safe manner and recover it. So that was our goal. That's what
Okay.
we're after. So I'm glad to answer any questions that members may have.
Definitely. Thank you. Did we have anyone else that will sign up to speak to this? I thought I heard there was 2 names.
Signed up, but I don't know whether he's still on the line or not, but he's available to answer questions as well.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, what I'll do is I'll bring it back to council. I have a couple questions, but I'm gonna open up to my council members first. Does anyone have any thoughts, comments on either of the two? Councilman Buffkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, Mr. Rometta, could you help me with the map? If I'm reading this correctly, there's a couple tow yards that are in IX right now. Is that right? Or maybe the parcels are so small and they are IH and it just doesn't show up at that level of detail on this map. Can you? I'm looking at particularly at the 2 or 3 or 4 that are sort of in the Capital Atlantic corridor.
I believe, Mr. Buffkin, that those are all IH, with the exception of, I think it is just a function of the parcels being very small, not being able to see on the large map. There may be 1 or 2 that are non-conforming. I will note that in the previous code, the tow yards were allowed in what was formerly called the Industrial 1 district, which is more similar to the IX district today. So rules did change with the adoption of the UDO back in 2013, such that there may be some non-conforming ones out there in the IX district.
Okay, that's very helpful. Mr. Chair, may I make a comment, please? Well, so you all may recall I objected to considering this text change at our council meeting when it came up and asked that it come to committee. And although I was not prepared to fully articulate why, I have since done some homework. And the basic issue I've got is with the change to IX. I think the change in the 1 mile rule and the staff recommendation on spacing could be helpful, and some of the changes to RPD policy could be helpful for reasons Mr. Johnson discussed. But the real concern for me is along the Atlantic and Capitol Boulevard corridor, the eastern side of District A, where I hope and I think we all aspire that one day will be a multimodal corridor centered around the future S line that would run from Raleigh, Wake Forest on north, and we'd have commuter rail and expanded bus service and more connectivity, and the place will look a lot different if we do those things than it does today. So my concern is allowing tow yards to locate there, here in this time period when the S line corridor isn't fully, it's not ready. But I'm concerned that if we're giving space to uses that I think we could probably all agree are not going to be appropriate for the future of the S line corridor, then we'll have less options for making the S line a success. So that's my basic concern, and the reason why I won't be able to support expansion to the IX district. Nothing against towing. I've been an HOA president in a townhouse community that was right next to a high school, and we relied on the towing companies to help us out when we had problems. Glad that service is available to our city, and appreciate some of the concerns that have been raised. And I do think some more flexibility would be in order, but I won't be able to support expansion to the IX district.
Okay, Councilman Milton.
Isn't that where the special use permit piece comes in? Like, don't they have to apply, even if it's allowed? I mean, if we expand it to IX, they still, anybody who wants to open a tow yard is going to have to come to the city and ask for permission to still open it in that area. Is that right? Is that what that means, special use permit?
Yes, sir. It's
Councilmember, you want Justin to walk you through what that permit process would entail?
Well, what I'm trying to get at is, if we don't want one next to the S line for future development, can we just decline the special use permit? Like, is that part of the process? Is it discretionary?
what the so the special use permit process is an evidentiary hearing with the Board of Adjustment, who are required to make certain findings before they approve the permit. Those things include generally items on how the proposed use will or won't impact adjacent or nearby properties, or how the impacts of those on those adjacent properties will be mitigated. So the board is charged with making those findings, and if the board does make the findings, then they grant the request.
Okay, that's helpful. So it sounds like it's not as quite discretionary as I had thought. Is there anything we can put in the proposed text change that would address this idea of looking at the future land use map, or I don't know, whatever guiding development principles we have? Because I agree with Councilmember Buskin, we probably don't want to allow, it's kind of like the transit overlay districts, right? Like around BRT, we're trying to encourage a different type of development there. And so what we don't want to have happen is we do this text change, and a tow yard opens, and then in the future we realize, oh man, that would have been great for some multimodal transportation or multifamily housing. And so would there be a way to incorporate in this text change some sort of discretionary element that helps us maneuver and guide these developments?
Yeah, Councilmember Melton, this is Pat Young. I'm with Planning and Development. I'll let Justin elaborate, but what I would recommend is kind of a two-tiered, exactly to your point, approach. One is what we call limited use standards, right? Which is we can put in clear restrictions or limitations that are required to be in place, distance or screening from S-line or from S-line adjacent properties. And then we can additionally have the special use permit process that allows site-specific mitigation and other conditions to be applied. So we can kind of do it as a two-part approach that I think gets at the concern you're raising.
Just one more. Using the BRT example, I know we're going to do like the transit overlay district along those corridors. If we were going to eventually, hopefully encourage commuter rail and develop around it, would we envision an overlay district there anyway? So that would, at a certain point, sort of preclude this type of development from occurring. And I guess the issue would just be if between the day the text change is approved and the day a potential overlay district was applied, if things open there, we can't exactly get the land back.
Councilmember, we have both Michael Moore and Pat Young, both of whom can add to my answer here. So you will soon see the text change related to the transit overlay district language. And it is true that the council is going to have some flexibility in where it would apply that district. So that could, I think there's been a lot of discussion about applying that to the bus rapid transit corridors, but it is a flexible tool that could be applied to commuter rail or inner city rail like the S line. As the council may remember, there is a station area planning process that has just been initiated by NCDOT. to study land uses around the S line that the city is participating in. So it is very well that we could get to the conclusion of that study with recommendations of additional local actions around that. So I think both transportation and planning and development have staff participating in that process that is just getting ready to kick off. So I'll leave it to them to add anything to that or correct anything that I maybe have misspoken.
Can we, because I just saw a message, and if we were in person, this would be a lot easier. But Mr. Johnson has some comments that he thinks can help address this. And since they're in this industry, I would kind of like to hear from him again.
Thank you, Councilmember Branch. What I'd like to speak to the fact is there's no desire within this requested change to cause any concern with respect to a future S-line corridor or even along, major thoroughfares where you want uses other than tow yards. So we would be fine with some sort of limited use standard that would protect those areas that Councilmember Buffkin has concerns about. We have no problem with that. We just need the ability to go in some of these IX districts that are not on the S line, or the future S line or along major corridors to be able to put a tow yard. I mean, that's which primarily you're looking at maybe existing industrial warehousing, industrial parks or warehousing parks and those types of uses that are not on those major thoroughfares that would be perfectly appropriate. As the comment was made under the prior ordinance, this was allowed in some of the light industrial type areas. So that would make sense, but there's no desire to cause any issue with those major thoroughfares or the S line. It would be fine to work with staff to fix that and to address that concern, because that's not what we're after at all. And quite frankly, over time, that property is too valuable to have a tow yard on it anyway. That's not the desire.
Okay. Councilman Buffkin, any comments from hearing that? Are you still a no?
Well, I'm still reluctant, and
I understand.
I'm reticent to disagree with the learned counselor, Mr. Johnson. But I think the key phrase there was no intent to cause this problem, and
Right.
what I'm trying to do is identify an unintended consequence.
Which is fair.
And I do appreciate Mr. Melton raising those questions and coming from a place of yes.
Yeah, and as I've looked at this too, first of all, Councilor, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, did you have anything?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just tend to agree with all of staff's recommendations. I like this new idea of a limited use. I like Mr. Poole's ideas around the, I think it was 10 miles that the car has to be towed to, and the 1 mile within transit, so folks can make sure they can get to their car when they need to go get it. And this 150 foot distance from a property line. So I'm in favor with all of those. I'm also really interested in seeing the ordinance move forward with those edits that Mr. Poole brought forward.
Okay. So I have a couple of thoughts I've had. Councilor Milton, did you want to say something else, or were you agreeing? Okay.
I was agreeing.
Okay. So when I first read this and thought about this in my own vacuum, I had an issue with it not being in Raleigh anymore. The way it's written, as long as you're 10 miles, you can be outside of Raleigh. Hearing Councilman Buffkin's concerns, that's makes me be more willing to say it can be outside of Raleigh. But the key is that wherever it is, it still has to be outside of a transit corridor. I know Mr. Johnson's concerns is just he's thinking about his client and everything and whatnot. But I'm just thinking holistically, the environment of tow companies and coming in. So the example I gave when I had a conversation with staff earlier was that, based on someone on New Bern Avenue, 10 miles could be almost in Zebulon. But the caveat is you have to be within transit. So there's a balance there. That was probably my major sticking point. but I'm willing to, I will say it this way. I want to keep it. At the same time, to address, I think, Councilman Buffkin's concerns, I will be willing to, it wouldn't be a game changer for me. It wouldn't hold me back. But overall, from what I'm hearing from today is staff's recommendations, but also I think looking deeper into some type of way to make sure that potential future growth areas are not negatively impacted would be helpful. Is that what I'm hearing, Councilman Buffkin, from you? Because that's how I'm interpreting your concern overall.
Yes, yeah, I do think that helps, and I recognize this, you know, we're sort of at the first step, or maybe even step -1. So,
Right.
you know, as long as, you know, I'll go along, as long as we pay attention to the issue. It is important to me. I want to protect that future corridor. So, you know, we can move it along in the process as long as it's with the understanding we're gonna try to protect that corridor as much as we possibly can.
Okay. So, Council Mayor Pro Tem Stewart, what was your motion based on things that I kind of stated as well again?
My motion would be to send this back to council, to send the proposed text change back to council with staff's recommended changes, as well as a limited use provision being considered as that moves forward. That would be motion number 1. And I'm looking to our attorney to make sure that I caught everything.
Yes. As it relates to the text change item, yes.
Okay. So that's, yeah, and we're dealing with a text change right now. And it's been properly seconded by Councilor Milton. All those in favor show by raising your hand. That passes unanimous 4-0. The next part is dealing with predatory towing and the changes that we need to make there. Council members, any thoughts on those suggestions? And this kind of goes back to the point I was making as far as keeping it in Raleigh. Because I think that's in this part. Councilor Milton.
I was just going to say that I'm fine with Mr. Poole's recommended changes to the ordinance. I would be willing to make a motion unless we have more discussion on it.
Is there any discussion from any other councilors? All right, feel free to make your motion.
I move to adopt staff's recommendations on the ordinance.
It's been moved and properly second to adopt staff's, for us to recommend the adoption of staff's recommendation of the ordinance to the full council. All those in favor show by raising your hand. That passes unanimously, 4-0. All right, so thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, too, for being patient with us. I know you would have loved for us to move this a lot sooner, but we just towed this along accordingly. I'm sorry, I had to have my one. It was a bad joke. Okay, sorry. All right, next we have the issue with parking on West Chelsea Drive. I'm trying to bring my screen back up.
Thank you, Chair. We'll be having Matthew Courier, our parking manager, will be coming to the podium in council chambers. We are
Okay.
shifting to the virtual podium. We have a number of operational staff in chambers should there be questions from council members. So Matthew will help defer to other staff where it might become necessary for background. So Matthew's got a presentation. As a reminder, you had a member of the public at your last public comment requesting that the council reconsider some parking changes that have been made. So Matthew will go through some of the history of the item and make sure that you understand the parking restrictions that are currently in place. He'll also speak to, I think there was some requested outreach to the neighborhood at the last council meeting, so he'll speak to that briefly as well.
Okay. I'll,
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, Council. Matt Courier, Parking Manager. We're going to pull up a presentation real quick. Stand by.
Council podium currently has the ability to share.
okay.
I promise it's coming up shortly. We're just working through a couple technical difficulties to make sure it comes up and is visible here.
So let's try council presentation. Give me 1 second. I think I can assist you with that, gentlemen. Hold 1 second. Right here, there, go to main presenter. Okay, you should be coming up now, sir.
There we go.
All right, there we go. All right, so again, Matt Courier, Parking Manager for the city. I'll be walking through Winchelsea Place to Tansy's point. We'll walk through a handful of items. There we go. A handful of items, overview of Winchelsea Place, history of the events that have happened to this point, and then options and staff recommendation on this. So Winchelsea Place is part of a subdivision that was built in 1977. It's located just east of Crabtree Valley Mall and just north and off of North Hills Drive. It's within District A. The total length of Winchelsea Place is right around 500 feet long. I'll draw your attention to the location of fire hydrants. There's one right on Old Village Road at the beginning of Winchelsea Place. Then there's a second fire hydrant at the back of Winchelsea Place. The circle that you see within the cul-de-sac is actually a green space landscaped island. So that area is filled in, and we'll show that in a moment. The street width of Winchelsea in the main trunk is 26 feet wide, and then as you make your way around the cul-de-sac, it's actually only 15 feet wide. So back in June of 2020, we heard from emergency services that a vehicle was unable to access the cul-de-sac or make their way around it. They actually had to back the vehicle out of the cul-de-sac. And when we received that, we did some analysis. We saw some images here of what it looks like on the backside of Winchelsea Place. So this is on the backside of that landscaped island that we talked about. You see the fire hydrant that we referenced on the map earlier here on the right, just past that driveway. And then you see in this, we have a couple of vehicles here parked in the cul-de-sac. Again, in that area, we're only looking at about 15 feet wide. So the actual pavement that's left for an emergency vehicle to get around this cul-de-sac is just not enough for them to even make it around. So in this instance, they had to back around the cul-de-sac. So between when we've heard about this and then in February 2021, staff evaluated it. We worked with the fire department. We worked with our internal folks in traffic engineering to understand what kind of parking regulations would need to go into place to make sure that emergency vehicles can access this cul-de-sac. What we did, because this is essentially not a traditional no parking zone that we put through the city and that you would typically see come through with the traffic schedule, this is really blocking a travel lane. So we usually don't bring items like this to council because we don't necessarily have to traffic schedule areas that shouldn't be parked. In this example, a travel lane. So in February 2020, beginning of that month, we installed no parking signage around the cul-de-sac. So what I'm going to show next, the fire department took one of their fire trucks out to the cul-de-sac and drove it around, and we wanted to show you what that looked like. So you can see here the video, you're basically positioned in the cul-de-sac looking back across Winchelsea Place.
You can see the fire truck here has to swing to the opposite side of the road in order to swing into this cul-de-sac. You can see as it goes around, not a lot of space beyond that fire truck between it and the curb. So as you can imagine, any vehicles that are parked in the cul-de-sac would certainly make it impossible for the fire truck here to make its way around. What you're seeing in the middle of your screen, you can see there's some tables and some benches and this landscaped kind of green space island, as well as some mature trees. As it makes its way around the backside, you'll see going really slow. It's about as tight, I believe, as that fire truck can turn to not hit the landscape island and also not damage any property. As it makes its way exiting, you'll see that it hugs that inner side in order to make sure that it clears the curbing as it exits. So this map here shows the no parking restriction that staff put in place in February of 2021. The red line that you see around the cul-de-sac, and then also at the throat of the cul-de-sac, is the area that we signed as no parking to make sure that those, again, emergency vehicles can make their way into the cul-de-sac and then safely get out efficiently of the cul-de-sac. And again, you can see a blowout of that landscape traffic island. It's about 60 feet wide, tables, some benches in there, as well as some mature trees. So between February and July, staff received multiple reports from the Solid Waste Services Division that they were incurring difficulty servicing Wen Chelsea Place. So their vehicles were incurring parked cars that were impeding their ability to provide, access and service to Wen Chelsea Place. So in July of 21, we had a multi-departmental on-site meeting. We'll show some photos here. We pulled a solid waste services vehicle out there. We legally parked some vehicles along Wen Chelsea Place here. And as you can see from this photo, a solid waste services vehicle with cars parked on both sides of Wen Chelsea it's a pretty tight width there for that vehicle to safely get through that 26-foot wide street width. The next photo here, you'll see now the perspective is flipped. The landscape island is behind the truck, and as it exits that cul-de-sac landscape area, we have two legally parked vehicles, the white van on the right and then the white truck on the left. I've circled where the no parking signage was installed, so you can see these are both legally parked vehicles, and you can see it is a very, very tight exit for this solid waste services vehicle to get through there safely, again, without damaging property. We typically use solid waste service vehicles as good analogs for emergency vehicle access. So Solid Waste Services is on our streets every week servicing, and we lean on them to let us know if they're running into access issues so we can make sure that the fire department, in the case of an emergency, doesn't run into those same issues. So in August of 2021, we sent mailers to the neighborhood to let them know that we were going to do an additional parking restriction to extend where those no parking zones were, to make sure that our solid waste services vehicles and therefore our fire and EMS vehicles could safely exit and enter the cul-de-sac. And then at the council meeting in August, you all heard some public comment and then referred this item to T&T committee. So we have a couple options here that we can go forward with. So mitigation option number one is this extended parking restriction. So what you'll see in the red is the current no parking restriction, and then in the blue is what we have proposed as an extension of that no parking restriction to ensure that emergency vehicles can get in and solid waste can get in and service the cul-de-sac. We have an additional 6 feet on the south side, and then an additional 88 feet on the north side. 88 feet may seem really long. Unfortunately, the distance between the two driveways on the north side was so close that there wasn't enough room for a legal parking space as we go 5 feet off a driveway on both sides. So we had to extend it 5 feet off of that northern and most western driveway. Mitigation option number 2 would be to remove the landscape island. Again, you can see about 60 feet wide, with some trees and tables and chairs that the folks in the neighborhood have placed there. Preliminary cost estimates are around $300,000 to remove that and then make the cul-de-sac up to standards. That would include off-site stormwater mitigation fees because we'd be removing permeable surface. And at the moment, there's no funding source programmed for this. It's unknown if the broader community is in favor of removal of the cul-de-sac. We did receive comments back, and we'll talk through the ask that we've done to the neighbors. But recently, we did receive comments that indicated that at least one of the neighbors in the neighborhood would not be in favor of removal. And there's also no staff process or petition process that is really built at the moment for an item like this. So we would have to build what that petition process looks like. There would be no parking gains from the removal of the island within the cul-de-sac. As you could tell from that fire truck making its way around, it's really having to lean on the edges of the cul-de-sac to safely and quickly make its way around that cul-de-sac without having to make a 3 or 4 or 5 point turn and slowing down its service. And then if we did remove the landscape island, the restrictions that we suggest in option 1 would still need to go in place, but only until the CIP project is finished. So what we would basically have is before the landscape island was removed, we would have mitigation option 1 in place. And then after the landscape island was removed, we would have this condition, which is basically the same condition that we have there today. So by removing the island, there's no additional parking gains, but there would also be no additional parking losses. So to recap, option 1 would be this, the additional parking restriction. Option 2 would be a CIP project to remove the cul-de-sac island. And staff's recommendation is the additional parking restriction. No action would be needed by council because this is an obstruction of a travel lane, and then we would make the appropriate installation. Happy to open this up to questions. And I again have a lot of staff here from a lot of departments to address any specific questions.
Matthew, can you speak to outreach that we did out to the community in advance of this meeting briefly?
Yeah, so this item was referred at the last council meeting last Tuesday. So we put together mailers and physically walked those over to the post office to make sure they could get out as fast as possible on Thursday. And folks received those mailers early this week. And we've received, we've specifically received one email from somebody in the neighborhood who was in support of the parking restriction and not in support of the removal of the island. And then we also received a couple of videos and some concerns that you also had heard at public comment during that time period. So we have a couple of videos that the community has sent in.
Could you show those videos? Is there a way you could show those now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's how you- Okay. Um, yeah, see the first one, I guess one of our solid waste vehicles came down, um, got some trash. I guess I don't, for whatever reason, I don't know why it didn't continue, but then I saw the fire truck came through and it did look pretty tight. And I know, God forbid, you need EMS as well, then I don't know how they both will get through there. Okay. I think we have some, is there anything else, Matthew, that you have presented this time?
No, sir.
Okay. I believe we have some two speakers that have signed up to speak, or do we just have one signed up? Alan, can you help me?
There were two individuals. I don't know if they're both on the line. We had Polina Voronsky and Sarah J. Kessel both signed up.
Okay, I
Um,
see Plurino sign, only one logged in.
Yes.
It's 3 minutes. I give her a chance to speak.
Okay, so hello, my name is Paulina and Sergey is also here. So as you see, the way the car parked in the last video where the fire engine was passing, the car was standing on the opposite side and both of our cars were standing and the fire engine was able to pass through. Right now they want to take away, we have multifamily cars, so we will not have any space where to park. The neighbors next door won't have, already complaining. So I have a few points here that I would like to address. One person cannot decide for the entire street. Is there was engineering done, and if the subdivision was built in the 70s, how come there was not an issue before and it become an issue now? Is the road is not up to code? We have three more circles, very similar in our subdivisions with no restrictions at all. I mean, how is it possible that only our street has it? So that's one point. Um, so looks like the city made that mistake. If the cars cannot pass through, this was a city mistake that they did. That was their planning. Maybe there wasn't supposed to be such a curve on the exit. Maybe it was needed to be more smoother because it narrows it down, and maybe it needs to be cut and provide more space for the vehicle to pass. Maybe the circle needs to be reduced and not to be as big. So and I'm not sure why Mr. that was presenting before, he said there would be no gain in parking. There will be gain in parking because you can still park by your house and have a space in the middle. So there would be space, there would be gain. The, the houses that are located around the circle have a very deep 45 angle degree driveway. And imagine if there is emergency situation, the snow, they won't be able to get out of their parking, out of their driveway. That's how steep it is. They don't address it now. They don't consider this is in the safety issues at all. So you saw on the exit, the car, both of our cars were parked on the right. The van and my car was behind, and the vehicle was able to pass through the fire engine, even with the vehicle parked across. So they wanna take 8 feet from our side and 22 or 88 feet. I mean, the car can still pass through. And it was in the dark too. 8 houses eliminate fire. Yeah, the homes, you devalue our property values. Number one.
Okay, uh, I'm sorry, but it's 3 minutes per person.
Okay,
You said your
I have-
husband's there with you?
Yes, yes, he's here.
Yes, hi. Can I talk?
Yes, sir.
Yes, like, I don't know what, oh, wow. Hold on.
Just talk.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I don't know what is why it's a big issue because construction it's a geometry and mathematics involved. We have a circle, useless circle, 60 feet diameter. I don't even know if we can put inside. Who cares about pretty tree if we live 24/7? Now we're concerned about safety because what is going on in Raleigh, crashing businesses. I just want to see where is my car is. Also, this subdivision 50 years old. We have like 3 more circles like that, and nobody concerned about. And also we have a houses restriction height. What they talking about. And they put like no parking anytime. But even garbage truck driver refusing to actually come on our street. Its road is clear, everything waiting for him, and he refusing. This is a personal issue. It's not about. This is an old subdivision. We have a 5 cars. We have a big family, and eliminate. We have a 14 houses in our subdivision, and they want to eliminate 8 houses parking space. This is the city fault. I'm in construction field. This is city fault because they support you guys planning, you guys approval. And now if if you have any issue, you guys supposed to fix. I don't know. I don't know how you can come up with the budget $300,000. If you want me to pull under my permit and fix it, I'm more than happy to do so pro bono. We're not supposed to suffering as a residents. We pay property tax and we want to come over home and have a parking space. It's an old subdivision. Just right now we have an issue. After 50 years, almost 50 years, now we have a problem. How about another circles and everything? Less diameter. We have a road, not 15 feet, 18 feet diameter. I mean, I'm talking about wide. Another circle, 17. I measure it up because I walk through. Because if garbage man don't want to pick it up and do his job, maybe you have to switch garbage man, because it's causing problem. And we need the parking spaces. Extended parking space is ridiculous. Because your job is fixing, not our neighborhood. We need parking space. What can I say? It's I mean, it's a geometry and mathematics. Yeah. Yeah, and also visitors try to park everywhere. We try to obey your rules and regulation. When visitors come over or servicemen come over, they park anywhere. They blocking your circle anyway. It's not going to work because guys who come over, they don't care. They park anywhere and blocking your circle. Maintenance, any delay.
Thank you, thank you, sir, too, for your comments and information there. As far as from what I gathered, I think the main concern is you don't want to lose your parking spaces, because you feel vehicles can get through. I kind of want to open this up for council now to ask questions. We do have staff in the chamber that can come and speak to public safety and fire. And actually, before I'll open up the council. Do we have someone from the fire department that can come and speak to their concerns?
Sure. Charles Williams is making his way up here.
Good evening, Councilman.
Good evening. Can you share with me the concerns that you all have based on if nothing were to change, what would be the impact to you all? And you saw the videos we did. It seemed tight to me. I know you couldn't get a ladder truck through there if you needed to. But I would like to hear from you all. From you.
Well, first of all, I want to start from the beginning on the average fire emergency call to this residence will be 4 engines and 2 ladders. You saw the picture of one ladder, which has a single chassis. There's another ladder that responds that has 2 chassis, and it's a tiller. And that particular one would probably be sticking out on the very entrance of that cul-de-sac. So that would be one problem. The first initial approach is to try to reach the closest hydrant, which is in the very center of that cul-de-sac. And if we clog that up with 4 engines, then we're going to have apparatus lined up along the street, and our personnel will have to walk downhill, which is a problem to get to the residents of the property that could possibly cause an injury to the firefighters and property damage if we try to back in and out of that cul-de-sac. So that is a concern of ours.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Is anyone there from Solid Waste?
Yes, we have Marion Staley that I believe is here representing Solid Waste. So Marion, I'm sure will be coming to the podium.
Okay.
We also do have a representative from Stormwater Engineering Services and also the police department, just so you have better context of who's in while Marion is approaching the podium.
Okay, thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Marion Staley, City of Raleigh Solid Waste Services.
Yeah, and my question's the same. We saw the video, but you all are out there weekly. So I would like to hear the challenges you all have been having and what would happen if there were no changes.
So yes, sir. In reference to the first video that you saw, what you saw is a side loader truck, which is an automated truck that has an arm. He entered into Winchelsea making a right, and then he dumped. When you go into Winchelsea, you can see the actual cul-de-sac and where parking is. So what that driver did was collect 2 containers that he was able to collect, then back out, and then he proceeded onto the route. That didn't represent a reduction in service, but it did represent a rerouting. So what we have to do on a 50 to 75% basis is let that truck go, pull resources from another route, which is a smaller vehicle, which already is, the route is designed for the capacity of that vehicle, but pull that vehicle over, then go down and actually collect. That creates a couple of problems. One, routing, collection efficiency, cost, but also because we have pup trucks that take, say, 2 tons, by the time he gets to that street, he has to make sure that he's able to collect 14 houses that may have multiple containers at the location. So that's the problem that we see happening over if no change happens. We no longer can actually service with the automated vehicle. It'll have to be a whole new rerouting.
Okay. Okay. That's helpful for me. Thank you. At this time, I want to open it up for council. Vice Council, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm definitely interested in hearing from Councilmember Buffkin, as I believe this is his district. But I do have a question in terms of a solution, and I'm wondering what staff would think, or if they've already considered this, in terms of making parking limited on trash collection day. I know that doesn't solve the emergency vehicle issue, but it sounds like the solid waste vehicles may be a more frequent and a bigger challenge. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I can address that. So we did look at that in this situation. We haven't done trash collection day only no parkings around the city because it hasn't really been necessary. In this instance, doing that would free up access on days where solid waste services vehicles need to get in, but we would still run into the same issue with getting fire apparatus, safely into and out of that cul-de-sac. So for us, we tend to consider, issues like this a blocking of a travel lane rather than an institution of an area of no parking. So while to your point, that a kind of no parking restriction on days with solid waste collection would solve the solid waste issue, I think we would still run into emergency vehicle access issues here.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
So this isn't a new cul-de-sac, this isn't a new island, and I have looked at the map and seen that there are other cul-de-sacs and islands located nearby. I'm curious why, and I think that neighbors asked this question as well, I'm curious why it's a problem now, or if it was just not a recorded problem because our emergency vehicles hadn't tried to access it before this time. But a little light on that would be helpful.
Yeah, so there are 3 other kind of landscaped islands within this community. For us, access restrictions here are based on behavior, and in this case, parking behavior. So if there isn't an access issue if cars aren't parked on the street. So as far as we can find, we have not had reported incidents on any of the other cul-de-sacs with access issues with emergency vehicles or with solid waste, at least on a consistent basis at all. So in cases like this where we have recorded emergency vehicle access concerns, staff takes a conservative approach and solves those so that, again, if in the course of an emergency, that, our first responders aren't delayed.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilor Buffkin, you were kind of mentioned.
Yes, and thank you for that, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. As you've seen in the presentation, this has been going on a long time, and we have, done the best we can to reach a solution. And I would say first, council members, if you haven't worked with Mr. Courier, you should get to know him, and when you do, you'll have full confidence, like I do, that he's fair, creative, and put a lot of effort in trying to resolve this. So Matthew, thank you for your efforts on this. This is not an easy solution. And maybe I can add a little color in response to one of your questions, Mayor Pro Tem Stewart. So the driveways that are at the end of the cul-de-sac are quite steep. And that's why people started parking on the cul-de-sac to begin with. And you can, see the obvious problem, whether it's inclement weather, ice and snow, people want to know they can get their car out in the morning. Or if it's individuals that have challenges with ambulatory movement, that's a concern too. We don't want to force people into a situation where they have to try to navigate a steep driveway when it's not safe. So that's kind of how this all came to my attention. And so one concern, and Mr. Courier, you may want to speak to this, is, I'd really like to preserve a solution for the folks that live at the end of the cul-de-sac who need a safe place to park, a flat place to park, not in the cul-de-sac because of all the problems we've heard about now. So, initially I thought that we had got to a pretty good place with those folks being able to park down the street. And then something happened where that parking was being taken up by other people. And so the solution didn't look as good as it did initially. But Mr. Courier, maybe you could speak to that and this challenge of trying to preserve some safe parking for the folks that have these really steep driveways. It really is quite treacherous. You might have seen on the map that the creek goes in there and the elevation falls off rather steeply going down from the cul-de-sac to the creek. But anyway, let me respond and then maybe I'll have a few more comments.
Yeah, so this one's tough. So to your point, we're dealing with issues of topography, length of driveway there on the back side of that cul-de-sac, which is difficult for the folks that live back there. When we made the original no parkings to make sure folks could get to the cul-de-sac, we did our best not to push that no parking down the street. To your point, to give those folks an opportunity to park at least somewhat close to their house. To your point, there are a lot of cars, from those adjacent houses at the throat that park on the street. I think one of the houses has 3 cars that park on the street rather than in the driveway, and that's just forcing an over demand or over occupancy at that throat. And to your point, denying access for those folks that are deeper in the cul-de-sac, which would push them further down the road for them to get to their parked car, especially in inclement weather. So it's a complex and difficult situation to solve because we're dealing with fundamental infrastructure here, and short driveways and steep access, and then folks who park on the street consistently. It's just it's a really complex curb space management issue here.
So before us council, the council is, we brought this in to hear the case, to hear the situation. Um, looking at all the videos and hearing from staff, you know, I'm I'm not sure we have many options other than to have staff proceed to make sure that we have the safe right of way. And this is safety for all residents. It's not about one house or 2 house. It's about all the homes there. If someone calls for an emergency at any time of day, we need to make sure that the emergency services can get there. We heard about the engines that respond, but you throw on top of that police and if EMS is needed. You have now almost 10, 12 vehicles needing to maybe get to a house at the end. We don't know. We pray it's never needed, but we plan for just in case and not, in case of. So any other council members have any questions, concerns? Councilman Buffkin, this, like I said, this is your district. So we're going to kind of lean on you as well, but I will support you in that. So Councilor Milton, you wanted to make a statement?
I was just going to add, obviously, I am empathetic to the comments that were made by the residents. I live on an alleyway, so it's basically a one lane, one way street. And we have the same issue on my road. No, we don't park on the street. Everyone has to park in their driveway. And the comment about diminishing property values by taking away the parking, I would argue that if the city can't pick up your trash, or if an ambulance or a police car can't get to your house or your neighbor's house if there is an emergency, that diminishes property value as well. Just because this recently became an issue doesn't mean it's something that should not be addressed. I understand the argument, well, this circle's been here forever, and why is it an issue now? It may have been an issue before, and it just became identified now. But now that we know about it, and we've seen the video, and we know that these necessary services cannot access the street, I don't feel like we can do anything but the staff recommendation. So I'm prepared to support staff recommendation 1 to proceed with the additional parking restriction.
Any other questions, or is that a motion? Councilman Buffkin?
Well, I'd be inclined to support that movement, or at least go in that direction. I would be remiss if I didn't share my impression from what I've heard from the constituents there, is that there is not agreement about removing that landscape circle. Clearly folks are using it as an amenity today, and everything I've heard makes me think that those folks like it and they want to keep it there. There's some other things that have come up that we're not here to talk about today, but somebody has a house that's been under construction for a long time, and I think that needs some attention. I'd like staff to follow up about that. But not the topic for today's discussion. But I do think option one is probably our best option. And Mr. Chairman, I take your comments to heart. I think in the end analysis, this might be a situation that government can't fix. And what we really need is folks to work together, treat each other like neighbors, be kind, be considerate, and understand that, folks that live at the end of the street may be in a little bit different situation than you. So I'm asking for peace and harmony as a result of this. And, I think it might also be worth exploring some kind of permit system to make sure that folks who are at the end of the cul-de-sac have some place that they can park that's safe and they can access their place. So, there might be some additional work to do, but again, Mr. Courier's been keeping me updated along the way, and I am confident in his work and would support moving ahead with option one.
Council Milton.
I move to approve staff recommendation 1.
All right, it's been moved and properly second. Any more questions? Seeing none, all in favor, show by raising your hand. All right, motion carries 4-0. Yes, Deputy Clerk. Oh, second by Councilor Buffkin. Yep, Councilor Buff. Motion was made by Councilor Milton, second by Councilor Buffkin. And again, I think it goes back, Councilor Buffkin said it best, the community working together to try to come to some sense of harmony. And if the community comes together and says, hey, we want this island removed, we'll work with staff on some type of process that can cover that cost as well through whatever means. But today's was about the parking. One thing I did notice in the demos where you had the no parking signs up, the residents that Councilor Buffkin were talking about, I didn't see those cars there on the area that we're really talking about extending it to. So it sounds like they found a place, at least for right now. But we'll continue to work through it, and any other issues, concerns that come up, council will address. There are no other items on the agenda, and we have no pending items. So with that being said, does staff have anything else for us?
No, thank you for the time today.
Thank you. And I do want to thank all the staff that were in the chamber that was prepared to speak. Thank you all for your time. Thank everyone for participating, and have a blessed day. Take care. We are adjourned.